It's a really, really polarized and sad state of affairs. And I am so disappointed to have been educated with someone who is feeding that polarization by speaking with no nuance on these topics at all.
Hello and welcome to the show where I try and make a little sense out of this stunning and increasingly brave new world that we all live in by talking to a series of expert witnesses about their experiences, interests and concerns. It's important in life to be in touch with your feelings, but it's also crucial to be able to back those feelings up with facts. And so the purpose of this show is to push past purely personal or political promoting positions, separate fact from fiction and fake news headlines in the hope of uncovering important home truths. And today I'm talking Sense Not Sensibility with Catherine, a self-employed mother of two who blogs and tweets under the handle FemaleFedUpWithFeminism. Catherine worked in the computer games industry around the time of the GamerGate controversy and also studied at Cambridge University with feminist writer Laura Bates. She therefore struck me as extremely well placed to comment on Ms. Bates's portrayal of gamers in her recent book, Men Who Hate Women. This interview is very much a companion piece to Catherine's excellent account of the extremely nuanced and multifaceted story of GamerGate, as featured in my series fact-checking the accuracy of claims made by the woman who hates men for money. One viewer described it as, a few quibbles aside, a shockingly good picture of what GamerGate actually was. And if you haven't already, I strongly recommend that you watch it first, because this conversation is very much an expansion of Catherine's account. In this discussion, we dig into more detail about why Catherine felt compelled to contribute to the discussion about Laura Bates's extremely man-hating book, and why she felt more than a little anxious about doing so. Take it away, Catherine.
Okay, so I guess the first thing I would say is I don't really follow her publications. I really don't. I haven't kept up with any of the things she says. She has me blocked. She deleted me on Facebook, but I have. She kind of has never been my main concern in this. Like I was at university with her, but I was also at university with another group of people who, to me, are a lot more troubling than her. I'm not going to name them. Because these are people who work a lot with Antifa. They sit there like, I view them as the intellectual wing of Antifa. Like they produce stuff that's kind of like justifying all the Antifa violence. I mean, I would be afraid for my safety if I were to name them now. So they were the people I'm kind of more concerned about, frankly, and I knew them a bit better. But I didn't read her book, and I found out about her book, and the first way that it was kind of introduced to me was, hang on a minute, she said that this mini conference said this and this and this, but also that there were no, I can't remember what phrase, ethnic minority women or women of colour present. Yeah. And I do like to attend that conference. I always go late because I like to put my children to bed first. But I also happen to know Natty, who organised it and runs it very actively, works her butt off on the evening to run it, and who happens to be half Jamaican. And I thought, that's just like, that is so just wrong. Like how can you say such a thing? How can you be so sure of yourself and yet not have done the research? Because it wouldn't take long to uncover that, I would imagine.
No.
Natty, yeah, it's her thing.
I was just going to say, presumably, I think the safe money at the minute is on the possibility that she may be sent a researcher for a short while. Maybe she
was that. I mean, maybe she went for 10 minutes. I personally don't think she'd be that dishonest as to say, I was there and I saw this and I saw that and I spoke to this person. Like, I think she could have just put her hair in a ponytail and popped a video on and been there for a few minutes. I think, as I think whoever, either Elizabeth or Natty pointed out when you interviewed them, the fact that she only talks about stuff that happened in the first 10 minutes of the conference, and there would have been so much other stuff for her to object to so much more strongly, I think she just left.
Yeah.
I think that's the most likely explanation.
Yeah, I mean, I'd accept that as well. It's just purely so many people that were there sort of reckon that they would have recognized her. You know, so I'm open to both interpretations.
Cool. So I guess, yeah, so that was the first thing. And then I got asked to respond about this GamerGate business. But I was really, really upset by that, actually, that statement. And as I'm gonna read the message that I sent to Laura, and it does go back to GamerGate, which I will be talking about, by saying there were no women of color or ethnic minority women present, effectively, she was using people like me. I mean, my background is, I guess I have my parents is Levantine. All four of my grandparents came to the UK from Cyprus in the 1930s and the 1940s. So yeah, okay, maybe I'm not the most foreign person, but I do happen to know that it was, you know, run by a woman that's mixed race. Like this feeling of being used as a shield. This feeling this work is being done in my name and in the name of other ethnic minority women. And that is so silencing. It makes me feel so unheard, and it makes me feel so excluded. And it just brings out in me this huge feeling of injustice in being used in that way. And I do find it offensive. And I have been not only really upset by this and really stressed by this, it has really dominated my life for the past few weeks. I had to read her book because I thought, hang on a minute, I can't respond to this GamerGate stuff if I don't, you know, actually read the whole book. I had to read it during a time when I had some serious like family responsibilities to take care of. And I'm actually very resentful of my labor that has kind of been co-opted, because I just saw this as so kind of egregiously wrong and ill-researched on so many levels. I actually have gone off. I've spent the past 2 to 3 weeks rereading everything about GamerGate, refreshing my memory, making notes, because I don't want to get names and dates wrong, because particularly I know that if I do, that's going to be used against me, even if I just make a slip up on a name or a date or an event or whatever. And it's caused me some really deep stress and anxiety. And I'm very resentful of that, actually, because this isn't actually what I want to do with my life. I don't want to be a professional activist. I have many other things that I do in my life. And I've been derailed by this, and I actually really resent it.
Well, you know, I should say, you know, particularly in that context, thank you very much for agreeing to do this. You know, because you know, I do appreciate, you know, it has, you know, taking a chunk out of you, taking the time, as you say, to, you know, kind of refresh yourself and GamerGate and everything. I suppose kind of, you know, one of the reasons I thought it was important to do this series, because I agree, I kind of resent having spent a day in my summer holidays reading her book, even though I did personally find aspects of it quite funny. Ultimately, it's deeply offensive, because ultimately, not only is it quite disgraceful in the way it projects the kind of overall personality of men, for want of a better sort of term. It projects such hatred onto men, but it also, you know, particularly in the example you're giving, but in many other examples, it completely just removes women from the narrative. And that is, I agree with what you're saying, you know, in terms of she's kind of co-opting your voice. But she's also, I think, intentionally removing women from the narrative, because all the entire purpose of that book was to smear men broadly, smear school children significantly, but most particularly smear the men's rights movement, because they're her competition, and it's now a full-time career for her. And the difficulty that Laura has is whenever you look into many of the facts in this book, which is another part of the series and the purpose of talking to you about GamerGate, her facts don't stack up at all. And she's
Yeah.
very
And this book is a hit piece.
Yeah.
It's just a hit piece. And I actually thought, hang on a minute, how long did she take to write this? Funnily enough, I looked up whatever her last publication was, like just to compare the dates. And my first disclaimer, I had no idea that her last book was called The Burning, and it's about, I think it's a fiction, but it's about like some girl that was burnt as a witch. I actually have some YouTube videos that I made about the Salem witch trials last year. As God is my witness, I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea that was one of her topics. I really, truly, it's a complete coincidence. So I don't want anyone to think that I made those videos because I had some kind of problem with her or anything like that. Absolutely not. But I think it looks like she basically wrote it in a year. It's possible she may have been working on it before her other book, but like it looks like she had a year to look into. She looks into so many different communities. And not only that, she looks into those communities, but half of all those chapters are also talking about her experience from what she hears from these school kids and what other people like her are trying to do to combat this. So it's a huge amount to pack into this one book and to do in this really quite a short space of time. And it has the quality to me of maybe like a series of articles, a series of like editorial articles or something like that. Is that the right word? Or investigative articles or something. It's really not, I wouldn't say that it's the level of research that you would want to put into an actual book, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I was quite astounded by the lack of research that went into that book on some levels. And it is, I mean, she accuses men's rights activists of essentially being conspiracy theorists. But, I mean, this book, as you say, they're kind of, to a large extent, they're chapters about very different kind of groups and movements. And she kind of molds this into a join the dots conspiracy theorist, where kind of one minute she's talking about Elliot Rodgers, kind of doing a mass shooting in California, and she's linking that to Boris Johnson's election campaign,
Like Elliot Rodger was like not an MRA. Like he wasn't, as I'm aware of it, like he wasn't subscribed to any MRA channels. I think he was subscribed to like some pickup artist stuff, but he was also subscribed to the Young Turks, for example.
Yeah. And
she uses that as like a way to smear kind of like anyone who has ever disagreed with modern feminism. But it's funny because you mentioned that she's used us as conspiracy theorists, but like what she's written as a conspiracy theory, the one word that kept coming up for me as I read this book was projection.
Yeah.
And the clearest place that came up for me, because I've always had in my mind, like feminists will get wound up about any discussion of one of their pet issues that's not on their terms. That's what runs them crazy. And she actually used that phrase. She actually said these people want to have these discussions, but they don't want to have them in feminist terms. I can't remember where in the book she wrote that or how she exactly phrased it, but it's like she's almost admitting, like, I don't want these conversations to happen on any terms other than my own. And yet she accuses MRAs of wanting everything to be on her terms. It's just...
The level of lack of self-awareness never stops to astound me. I would suggest that, the general public aren't going to be interested in her book. Feminists are going to be interested in her book, and men's rights activists are going to be interested in her book, largely no one else. So if you wanted to sort of like just take an outsider's perspective, at the very least, it'd be very easy to, put a plague in both houses, because I mean she's describing, it's basically she's talking about all of these groups like GamerGate or men's rights presenting as victims, or it's attempting to produce a centrality of a victim's narrative, and that is fundamentally.
I think people like this are so close. They're so cosseted because I think they are just surrounded by people who agree with them, and that these media invitations to speak on the BBC, on these major things, keep flooding in. There's just no need to ever engage with the criticism. And when a school child does disagree with you, you get so offended that you have to write a book about it. But I think, as you were saying, I think the audience of this book this is not written for the mainstream. This is not at all written for the mainstream. This is written for, I think, this small group of people, because it's another citation that they can use, and it's all about generating citations that you can use. And so the two objectives are censorship of anything that disagrees with you on the internet, and number two is injecting this into schools and school children. Those are the two objectives, and those are objectives that, like, you don't need to reach the mainstream in order to achieve those, and that's very clearly what's going on here.
I mean, the crucial thing about Laura Bates, and again why I'm spending so much time on this book, is it needs to be discredited, because she does have so much credibility in the mainstream. You know, kind of, if Radio 4 want to talk about a women's issue, she's pretty much the first person they're going to lift the phone to talk about it. And, you know, it's just sort of assumed. What one thing I did, because I've tried to, you know, kind of pinpoint manageable chunks of the book to look at. And one of the first things I did was the very first quote in the very first chapter, which is a very extreme and misogynistic statement made by a supposed incel, which basically is, you know, kind of, that's her started for 10.
The one that was actually 10 years old.
10 years old, yeah. And she claimed to have kind of come across this while infiltrating.
I don't know much about the first two chapters, the pickup artists and the incels and the MGTOW. Like, I mean, I maybe have more than a layman's knowledge, but I don't know the nitty gritty of it. The stuff later on in the book that I do know the nitty gritty of, I know that is wrong. And just for example, like the way that, because I've read Jordan Peterson's book, I've read Dr. Warren Farrell's book, I've listened to Karen Storm's videos, and I know that the quotes she has used have been taken out of context, and they aren't a true representation of those individuals. And I know that the level of research into GamerGate is just hasn't gone beyond, you know, the main SJW articles. I know that her look into the men's rights movement hasn't gone beyond David Futrell. And that's what happened to Cassie J. She scratched a bit deeper. She went beyond David Futrell, and they tried to crush her because of it. Yeah. And I think anyone who knows anything about any one of these things that she's looked at, if you see the dishonesty of one of them, then in her research of one of them, all I can do is assume that it's that same level of research and that same level of honesty or lack of it in the rest of it. So that's how my opinion on the work as a whole has been created.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as I say, I was quite shocked at the lack of research, because you know, another cynical perspective on this is she's essentially just appropriated the work of a lot of other SJWs who have produced a narrative in many areas, such as GamerGate, and she's just
put something like that together in 1 year. Like, how much research can you do? Like, you that's what you're going to end up using. You don't have time to.
Almost entirely desk research. I mean, the crucial thing for me was she didn't speak to one single person that she speaks about, and that to me speaks volumes. I suppose the question is, why would, and I'm not remotely suggesting that you shouldn't feel what you feel, but why would somebody, an intelligent woman who went to Cambridge University with another intelligent woman who advocates for equality and human rights for all, apparently, why would you be afraid of voicing your opinion about inaccuracies by another woman?
I don't want to be the next person that has a hit piece written about me. I don't want to be the next person that is accused of being a Nazi. I don't want to be dealing with that. I don't want my inbox to be flooded with, you know, when you have your 15 minutes of internet fame, which I do not want in any way. And I've always tried to say my piece because I've needed to get it out, but I've always tried to not attract that kind of attention. I don't want that kind of attention. But it's going to happen when the eyes are on you, like that. That's what's going to happen. And like it happened once before, like I was part of a group of women who were just, what were we doing? We were just like supporting Philip Davies basically, and just saying, yeah, we believe that men have a right to have their grievances heard in Parliament and everything like that, and not just women on their own. We think they should be equal. And they wrote this really, really horrible hit piece, and suddenly they manufactured guilt by like 6 degrees of separation. So some of the other women in the group had spoken at a place that had also hosted speakers that were actually bad. And suddenly I found my name in this article being accused of like being associated with some kind of Nazi, whatever. Like my kids are a little bit Jewish. So it's like suddenly like I'm being accused of this, like literally, as God is my witness, like I'd never even heard of these groups. Every time I talk about it, I have to go and look it up because I don't even remember what these groups are even called that I was somehow being associated with. I don't want to deal with that. I don't want that to be what people find if they Google my name. I don't want my kids to have to go to school and be told that their mummy is some kind of horrible person. Once you've annoyed somebody from Antifa or whatever, you have to fear for your physical safety. So I really would rather not be doing this, but someone's got to do it. Someone's got to speak the truth.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, again, thank you for doing it, and I 100% understand your anxieties, and the anxieties that I kind of would share in kind of doing these sort of things. I think the kind of more people that stand up, the harder it is for them to go at you. But I remember the Guardian article you're referring to, and it is very typical. It's very typical of a lot of the things in Laura's book, where there's this kind of 6 degrees of separation, and it's essentially the equivalent of saying that you spent a city break in Berlin, and therefore you've got some sort of relationship with the Third Reich. It's just ridiculous. But
I don't think it was the Guardian. Thank God it was Hope Not Hate that came after that.
Yes, but
and the Guardian asked us for a statement, and I think we sounded too recent. Like we really defended ourselves, and we were like, we denounce any kind of Nazi whatever. And I believe that then the Guardian didn't print that because we sounded too reasonable, and they weren't going to bother to exonerate women. It meant nothing to them that women had been it caused a huge amount of anxiety. It was when I was pregnant with my second child.
Yeah.
And it meant nothing to them that we had been treated that way and lied about. And it meant nothing. They would not have taken the time to try and clear our names of that. It's really, really heartbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, but they were happy to report the claims by Hope Not Hate, and that says. I mean, do you think having kind of spent some time with Laura Bates, as Laura Bates is personally the sort of person that would do that to people? Either of doing it against people that she's attacking in her book, but think she's capable of doing it personally with you?
I don't think she would bother. I mean, I don't think she would bother, frankly. I mean, she's not someone that I'm worried about. There's other people that I'm worried about who, actually are scary. I feel I did send her an email because I wanted to give her a chance to respond to what I'm saying. So I asked her if she wanted to respond to the fact that I actually was at this event that she said had no ethnic minority women, and that I know it was run by a woman who's half Jamaican. And I also said, look, I've been asked to speak on behalf of GamerGate and on behalf of Not Your Shield, and do you have any comments about why you saw fit to exclude Not Your Shield? Because I wanted to be honest, because that nasty article that was written about me and the girls, they gave us an opportunity to comment in a way, they emailed us the night before and to an email address they knew we wouldn't check. They could have easily contacted us if they wanted to by our Twitters or whatever. And I didn't want to treat others in that way. I want to behave honestly. I don't want to make people feel that I'm out to get them, because I'm not out to get anyone. And I feel like probably if she did receive my email, I think probably what she would, if maybe she could have Googled me and seen the hit piece that I was included in and thought, oh, great, she's already been discredited. I don't have to worry about her. The job's been done. Maybe it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me as probably more likely that to engage with you in any way would mean that she would have to face up to actually responding to your criticisms, and I would certainly feel that your criticisms are extremely valid, to say the least. So it's I don't think she's got a.
Like if the event was run by a half Jamaican woman, then she's just wrong. So it's just an outright false statement, pure and simple. And I feel like the same goes for GamerGate, really. If you just anyone who scratches the surface of GamerGate with any amount of honesty for 5 minutes is going to realise all you have to do is read the hashtag and see who was posting the messages from it, and all you have to do is look at the FBI report, and you can see that no named GamerGater ever sent any of these kind of threats. And it's all about the conflation of the threats and the criticism. And that again is that's part of what her book is trying to do, is to cause that conflation. Like people saying, hang on a minute, your statistics around the wage gap do not prove what you're trying to convince everyone it proves, which I would imagine is what some of these school kids are putting their hands up and saying. That is not the same as no woman will go out with me, therefore I'm going to go out and shoot a bunch of women. Like, that's not like that, but that is what is being conflated. That is being conflated. So I think it's just they're just too invested in this it's this narrative that they're so invested in, that they need so much, but this narrative is so fragile because anyone who looks into it will see that it is false. And that's why you've got to call for the censorship from big tech so that people can't find out that it's false.
Yeah, and I think, and ultimately, that's what makes, to my mind, people like Laura Bates extremely dangerous, because on the one hand, it's these things to many extents are actually quite childish, petty arguments that kind of get blown up, and kind of GamerGate's clearly sort of one example where there were kind of serious issues at play. But to get to the stage of an FBI investigation just seems quite remarkable. But it's that thing about sort of, because the story is so fragile, you have to keep defending your position.
Escalating. If you're the one that started it, you've got to keep escalating so that you don't get busted. Just as an example, one of Anita Sarkeesian's events was cancelled because someone did a bomb threat, and that's one of the reasons the FBI was investigating. And I actually think if there are bomb threats and rape threats and threats of murder, I think that should be investigated. Like you cannot make threats like that. Like that's not okay. But for example, in Kathy Young's article, she talks about how she was at a panel or a meetup in somewhere, and they had a bomb threat phoned in as well, and they had to all go outside or cancel the event or something. It's everywhere, but the mainstream is only interested in that one side of the narrative. And I think maybe this segues into what I want to talk about with where are these threats really coming from, and who do these threats really serve? Because they certainly didn't serve any of the sort of mainstream Twitter, mainstream is the wrong word, but the sort of the named, active, vocal Twitter Gamergaters who were always very, very anti-harassment threats, would try and uncover wherever these threats were coming from, reported it in certain instances.
Well, I think most common sense people in any perspective would understand that it doesn't help the matter, but kind of internet savvy people who've witnessed things like GamerGate understand that it's kind of very quickly used just to silence your kind of perspective of the story. And that, I agree. I agree that I think the Candace Owen anecdote about Zoe Quinn is extremely telling. I have particularly, done a lot of investigation or research into internet abuse claims by some high prominent sort of MPs or high-profile MPs. And the thing that was the thing that possibly kind of got me particularly interested in this area because the thing that shocked me about that was that people who were presenting themselves as champions of victims, genuine victims of not just online abuse, but kind of physical and sexual abuse of the worst kind in in the real world, were essentially very clearly conflating criticism with abuse. So kind of once you realize that that's been done so overtly, you do wonder what's going on behind the scenes. And I think the Candace Owen story pulls the curtain back a little bit on that.
I think a lot of stuff, and again, this is why the Game Geno Pros leak was so important. It really just showed what does go on behind the scenes, and the mumbot doxing thing. It shows that they do get together to try and expose, like do one of these cardinal sins. Like if you talk to anti-GamerGate, like doxing is a cardinal sin, and that they are fully prepared to do that to other people.
Whatever the truth about Zoe Quinn as a person, there are a lot of threads and parallels with other individuals where there is this kind of consistent narrative of hypocrisy, of narcissism, of bullying behavior that that seems to be projecting the type of kind of behavior that they're performing onto other people. And in some cases, there's pretty firm evidence of borderline personality disorder and kind of other troubles. So I suppose the point would be that whatever the truth about that individual and the tragedy of someone taking their life, everything that's gone before that clearly isn't true or clearly is conflated, undermines genuine victims of abuse. So that would be the way I would look at it.
And these are people who claim to be advocates. Have been used. And I mean, even in the FBI report, funnily enough, one of the things that wasn't redacted, because it was just pages and pages of redacted messages. One of the message from like the FBI, and it didn't say to which or how many of the females in question. It said, you need to stop going to the media with this. If you want us to investigate properly, you can't keep going to the media. Yeah. And that had been, and I couldn't see the messages around it, you see, so I couldn't contextualize it any further than that. I don't know if they had done that or if they were asking if they could do that. I don't know which ones they were talking to, but it's clear that that is the objective. And also, the other thing I want to say is as well, I do not mean to suggest in any way that they are either responsible for all, or even like it may not be them themselves that are doing this. I don't want to suggest that they are necessarily even doing this to themselves. But there's another possibility that we haven't talked about, which is there are third parties who stand to gain a lot from this ridiculous debate that we are having in the West, this ridiculous culture war that we are having, and how it is taking our focus. Like the more time we spend arguing about like whether a man can be a woman and whether a woman can be a man, whether like men can have periods and stuff, like the more time we spend talking about that, the less time we have to talk about real issues. Like just for example, like the ones that I received a few years ago, who would gain anything from provoking me in that way? But these people that I mean, we know for example that like certain other states have, like it's a known thing that, for example, there are how many Russian bots are there, how many Chinese bots are there. Like this isn't a conspiracy theory, we know this is happening. Like just the other day, like there was this UN China thing, and I tweeted, I was like, this is the biggest trolling and probably the best trolling I've ever seen. It was like this Chinese UN spokesperson going, America has to work on its racism, and it has to work on its respect for women, and it has to work on its respect for migrants. And it's like, do you not see that you are being useful idiots here?
Yeah.
And these people have such an investment in stirring up this drama and this garbage. So no, I don't want anyone to take away from this, but I think these people, all they do is troll themselves. I don't think that's what they spend most of their time doing. But there are people who are gaining a huge amount from this garbage, and it is garbage. It's a waste of our time. It's a waste of our energy. We are arguing about nothing. We're talking about nothing. And I have to sit here and refute this garbage.
Yeah. I fundamentally agree. And again, it's kind of really big motivation as to sort of where I've come from with my projects. I have always viewed, particularly in the area of censorship, I've always viewed feminism as the useful idiots. And I think, that's starting to, kind of show itself to be true, because we're kind of heading down the line. I'm not convinced we're necessarily going to get there where, for example, misogyny becomes a hate crime, or kind of people, like the characteristic of sex becomes a hate crime, so men and women can make complaints about, kind of hate crimes. But you're already seeing it with the likes of, I suppose Suzanne Moore is a good example of where feminism's starting to get a taste of its own medicine. It's kind of...
They've always been coming for each other, though. I mean, from the beginning, they've been coming for each other like they came for Robespierre.
That's true. That's true as well. That is very, very true. But I think more to the point that you're making is that sort of, kind of if you push down a totalitarian road, which
you'll never be pure enough,
silences people. Don't think that feminists are going to be, kind of left out of that group that gets silenced. No, absolutely.
It's why this new media has come into existence. And it's why these people want to shut it up.
Yeah.
Like, for example, this young person that's in my life gets her news from some Philip DeFranco because she trusts him.
Yeah.
She trusts him. They're not stupid, these young people. I mean, maybe when they're really young, it might be easy to brainwash them, but as they get older, they're not stupid. And they can tell who's telling the truth. They know who's lying to them, and they are going to choose who they trust. And you can write a book and try and get the people they trust quieted. I guess that's the only thing. You don't have any arguments. That's the only thing you can do to quiet.
And it's such a dangerous thing to do. And I think we're very much seeing that with the kind of American election at the minute. That kind of whatever way that sort of plays out, the coverage of kind of the reality is that there are genuine grievances being brought in front of the courts, and there is evidence that has been brought in front of the courts, and the election isn't over. Now, it's probably unlikely that it's ultimately going to go anywhere, but the people that are invested in the Trump vote are watching the media completely deny its existence. And that, when you're getting to that stage with an entire country, that's a very dangerous place to be.
Yeah.
On a positive note, I'll say, just to put it back to GamerGate, I noticed that somebody on Twitter was asking for, where's a good place to go for coverage of the American election just the night it was happening, the kind of overnight thing. And, they were saying, well, X amount of people are currently following Orgone Avocad or Carl Benjamin, compared to the number that were following it on BBC. And that's just very much about, whatever you or I personally think about Carl Benjamin, a lot of people now trust him to just...
I think, who is it, Stephen Crowder just overtook or equalized with the Young Turks.
Yeah.
In terms of, his reach. So it's really sad. Soon, I think that's where we're going. We're going to have like a left-wing media and a right-wing media. And who was talking about, I think Ben Shapiro was talking about this. There's even going to be a baseball league. There'll be a baseball league for the right-leaning people, and there'll be a baseball league for the left-leaning people. And then certain companies will feel safe to advertise their stuff on one, and certain companies will only advertise their stuff on the other. So they don't get all these emails of how dare you advertise on this. It's a really, really polarized and sad state of affairs. And I am so disappointed to have been educated with someone who is feeding that polarization by speaking with no nuance on these topics at all. And
yeah,
it just, it's upsetting because, these are some very bright people who are doing this, very, very intelligent people. And if these people I know it's that old adage of if you spent as long doing your homework as you spend trying to not do your homework, you could get a PhD or something. But like, imagine like all this energy that they're using up and that I'm now having to use. Like, we could actually do something like useful for the world, for the future, and we're not. We're just like, it's just a waste of energy. It's so sad.
Yeah, I 100% agree. There, you know, no matter how things slice a thing, there are always two sides to a story. So actually, you know, people being able to talk openly and collaborate as adults, you know, that's the way forward. That's the way, kind of, certainly I think most people presumed the adult world was going to be like. But
yeah. I think I very naively, you know, assumed that people would act like adults. And I think that's one of the reasons I started doing this. I was like, people I know, and they're not behaving like adults, they're behaving like 3-year-olds, and I have to speak up about it because this is not okay. But yeah, you think how can an intelligent, well-educated person behave with such a lack of, with such disingenuity? And I don't know if there's a term for it, but there's just this principle that when you go into an argument, you should always enter an argument with a principle of generosity and a principle of having the most generous interpretation of what a person is saying rather than the least generous, like rather than always be trying to catch them out because they misspoke or to misinterpret what they say, always trying to give the most generous interpretation of their view, and always trying to argue with the, I don't know what the opposite of straw man would be, but instead of taking the straw man of their argument, to take the most valid part of their argument and argue with that. And I looked for it in Laura's book. I really did. I tried to be generous and I just couldn't find it anywhere.
Yes, and I have to agree, I couldn't find it either. So anyway, many thanks to Catherine for what I certainly found to be a fascinating and informative chat. For those of you who want to dig deeper into GamerGate, or even fact-check the fact-checkers for yourself, Catherine prepared a very detailed set of citations for our talk, and they're available to check out on her blog by following the link below. I'll also leave details so that you can follow her on Twitter, and if you've enjoyed her contribution, why not head over there now and let her know. I'll be back in the new year for plenty more sensible talking, and in the meantime, watch out for a special seasonal something that I've lovingly put together especially for you. Thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this content, you can help support this channel by liking, subscribing, leaving a comment and sharing this video with a friend. And of course, as always, if you see an elephant,
can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.
The Glass Blind Spot is brought to you by you, because it's your views, your likes and your comments that keep this show on the road.